Okay, so this is now the second half of your PM inspection underneath your truck. You will also come up here and check this. This is your air filter dryer. This dries all your air system in your truck. Make sure no moisture is in it, because when you have moisture in your air system, it can ruin components such as lines, chambers, all sorts of that. Want to make sure that's still up to date. None of your fittings are leaking. None of this is leaking, so that way you know you're sealed right there. Now up here, this is where you get to your transmission. This plate, you would pull this plate off if the customer asked for it. This is where we pull off to adjust the clutch inside of here. And this is your grease line that leads up to your throwout bearing. You want to grease that, make sure that's nice and greased so you don't have any problems there. You also want to make sure your transmission is not leaking, such as your pinion seal. There's a seal right here, your cooler lines right here. Make sure none of that's leaking. Make sure you have a little bit of a leak on this one. And then up here, you will get to your oil pan for your engine oil. You will go ahead and take your 1.5 inch socket to go ahead and pull the drain plug out of your oil pan, drain all your oil out, and then put it back in, and you'll put fresh oil up top. This is also your engine oil filter. This is what you will change with every oil change. This is what filters your oil, keeps all the harmful stuff to the engine out of your oil, so that way your oil is always clean, engine's healthier. Now up here at your front suspension, you will notice you have grease fittings right here. On your tie rod ends, you will have another slack adjuster right here for your brakes. You want to adjust that, make sure they're in proper adjustment so no further problems are caused by the pad. Same thing with the pads, you would check your wear lines, make sure everything's nice and good. You also want to grease that and grease this S-cam tube right here. In the front suspension, you also have what is called a kingpin. You will always want to make sure you properly grease that, because that is what your truck steers on. That pin is literally the king of the front suspension. That's why kingpin is the name. Want to make sure that's all nice and greased, so that way you have no further issues down the road. You also got your suspension components such as your leaf springs. You want to make sure that none of your bolts on your U-bolts are coming loose and they're nice and tight, such as your front shocks. Same thing on the rear. Make sure no oil is coming out of them and they're still not rotted out. Make sure they're still good. Luckily, we got good ones on this truck. You also want to check your leaf spring bushings right here. These ones are greasable, so there will be a grease fitting on these bushings. Also, some suspensions are different, some of them won't be, but you want to make sure you grease those up for a smoother ride down the road. As well as the other side, you have your slack adjuster to adjust your brakes, your brake shoes in here, make sure they're not worn out, your kingpin, make sure that's nice and greased, another tie rod end right here. Same for the leaf springs, make sure your bushings are nice and greased, make sure your bolts ain't loose, make sure your shock ain't leaking. Luckily, we don't have any issues on the front end of this truck.